Today is the 16th Sunday after Pentecost. We'll be back here again in Long Island, New York, and Huntington. And the epistle for this 16th Sunday after Pentecost is taken from St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 3. Brethren, I pray you not to faint at my tribulations for you, which are your glory. For this cause I bow my knees to the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom all paternity in heaven and on earth is named, that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened by his Spirit, with might unto the inward man, that Christ may dwell by faith in your hearts, that being rooted and founded in charity, you may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, to know also the charity of Christ, which surpasses all knowledge, that you may be filled unto all the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do all things more abundantly than we desire or understand, according to the power that worketh in us. To him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus unto all generations, world without end. Amen. Amen. The gospel. It's taking that according to St. Luke, chapter 14. At that time on the Sabbath day, Jesus had gone for a meal to the house of one of the leading Pharisees, and they watched him. There in front of him was a man with dropsy. Accordingly, Jesus said to the lawyers and the Pharisees, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took the man and cured him and sent him away. He said to them, "Which of you, if his son falls into a well, or his ox, would not pull him out on the Sabbath day without hesitation?" And to this they could find no answer. And then he spoke a parable to the guests, marking how they picked the places of honor. When a man asks you to a wedding feast, do not take your seat in the place of honor, in case there should be a more distinguished person than yourself invited by him. And the one who invited you and him should come and say, "Give thy place to this gentleman." And then, to thy shame, thou wouldst have to go and take the lowest place. No, when thou art invited, make thy way to the lowest place, and sit there, so that when the man who invited thee comes, he may say, "Friend, go up higher." And then thou shalt enjoy the respect of all at the table with thee. For everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, and he that humbles himself shall be exalted. Those are the words of today's Holy Gospel. Only the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, amen. Today, a few considerations on our battle of faith as it continues today. We have this so-called scandalous document of Pope Francis. In fact, it is a scandalous document, Amoris Laetitia, a little while ago, last year. And great scandal comes out because of this document, and there have been commentaries about how bad this document is and it goes against the faith. And we found that Cardinal Burke, along with 3 other cardinals, put together dubia. About a year ago, dubia. 4 dubia or 5 dubia, 5 doubts. Dubia means doubts of concerns they have in this document which show that it might be against the faith. And can the Pope please clarify what he means so that it's clear that his teaching is not against the faith. And Bishop Fillet tells us within the Society of St. Pius X that we see in this a new situation in the Church. Whenever you hear that word new, the Catholic should immediately raises a red flag. When we hear the word new, we remember what St. Paul says to us. If you hear a gospel that is new, a gospel that's different, a gospel that's other than the one that we have preached to you already, let him who preaches it be anathema. And that's what St. Paul tells us. And when he died, he said, "I have handed down what I have received." So the word new is a word that when we Catholics hear it, brings up concern. When we hear that word, we must be careful. We hear that word, we must say, all right, is it really new? What is new? We have a new situation. And the new situation is, said Bishop Fillet back in 2006 in our Society of St. Pius X, the Rome has changed its attitude towards us. Or rather 2012, in the Cor Unum of March of 2012. Rome has changed its attitude towards us since 2006. And it has been moving in the direction of tradition since 2006. It's been moving away from tradition, from Vatican II until 2006. Now we see a shift of Rome in the direction of tradition since 2006. And hence there's a new situation. And we must respond to it accordingly. We must recognize that we're in a new time. We're in a time that's not like what it was before. Before there was a complete opposition from all the hierarchy against all of tradition, against the teaching of the last 2,000 years. Now we find there are still modernists, there are still liberals in Rome who are promoting evil and promoting lies and promoting heresies. But at the same time, there is a powerful movement in Rome of Catholic bishops, Catholic men in authority, who are in the very Vatican, in the very annals of the Vatican itself, who are close to the Pope and Pope Benedict before, and now also Pope Francis, who have a certain affection towards tradition and a certain affection towards the tradition of the Church, which the Church since Vatican II always seemed to hate. Also, we see in this new situation, there's no longer a requirement to believe that Vatican II is doctrine. To believe that we used to be told we had to follow the doctrine of Vatican II. We have to adore the doctrine of Vatican II. We have to believe the doctrine of Vatican II. But now it's changed. And we have this release today, September 24th. So over in Italy, so 6 hours ahead of us, so it'll be early morning our time. Just released publicly a document written by 40 or signed by 40 theologians and priests, and finally released just today. It was actually written some time ago, and now there are 62 signatures attached to it. So there are the 40 original signatures, and then 22 added ones. Amongst the 22 added ones that we find released today is Bishop Fillet. He's one of the 22 added signatures of this document, which points out to Pope Francis that there are serious problems with Amoris Laetitia. No bishop signed the document, only priests, until Bishop Fillet, the bishop of the Society of St. Pius X, of course, who has no authority, but he is our superior. He is no authority as bishop, he's an auxiliary bishop, but nonetheless, he's the only bishop to sign on the document. And so we see here a document written by some theologians who are from around the world, some from Chile, some from Argentina, some from Italy, and around the world, and Australia being one of the places. And so that these theologians and seminary rectors and professors, many of them priests, some of them lay people, none bishops, put together a document of 25 pages called the Filial Correction. And this Filial Correction was sent to the Pope. And they even put the central part of it, wherein it is stated that the Pope is responsible for communicating 7 specific heresies. And the heresies are written out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, with the proof that they're heresies quoted from the Council of Trent. Each one first is a quote from the Council of Trent in almost every case. And then later on, other councils and documents, and also quoting the documents of Vatican II and Pope John Paul II, very particularly referenced often as Veritatis Splendor of Pope John Paul II. So that we have references from the Council of Trent, references from Vatican II, references from the post-Vatican II documents of the popes, showing that Pope Francis is going against the teaching of John Paul II, going against the teaching of Vatican II, and going against the teaching of the previous doctrines of the Church. And that there are 7 specific heresies. And then it says, these are not the only 7. These aren't the only 7. Now let's first note, we'll read here just a couple of the points. Let's read what we're going to point out here. You read here from the letter of the 40 priests, and the laymen also included, but professors of theology. These are professors of theology and rectors of seminaries, Novus Ordo, mainstream seminaries of the Church throughout the world in various countries. And the priests celebrate the new Mass. These priests are part of dioceses and part of the whole Novus Ordo structure of the church. These priests come together with a document. And in this statement, we'll go here just to a part of it. Here is the Correctio, which they wrote in Latin and gave to the Pope in Latin, the official language of the church, because they come from many different countries and backgrounds. So they decided that in this 25-page document, the central part, the actual correction, the Correctio, they would put in Latin. They also made translations into various languages. Here the translation into English. By words, the Correctio, in the middle of this document of 25 pages. First, they point out we have the right to criticize the Pope. And there's actually an article on dici.org today about this document in the SSPX official organ, dici.org. There are 3 parts of this 25-page document. The first part says we have the right to criticize and the duty to criticize when the Pope goes against the faith. The second part then mentions the actual quotes of the Pope in Amoris Laetitiae, particularly in chapter 8, that happen to be contrary to the faith. And then the statements of what the errors are. So, by words, deeds, and omissions, here quoting the text. By words, which is written originally in Latin, this is their translation into English. By words, deeds, and omissions, and by passages of the document Amoris Laetitia, Your Holiness, this is a letter addressed to Pope Francis himself, hence Your Holiness. By words, deeds, and omissions, and by passages of the document Amoris Laetitia, Your Holiness has upheld directly or indirectly, and with what degree of awareness we do not seek to judge, both by public office and by private act, propagated in the church the following false and heretical propositions. Number 1, this position is heretical and false and held by the Pope. A justified person has not the strength with God's grace to carry out the objective demands of the divine law, as though any of the commandments of God are impossible for the justified, or as meaning that God's grace, when it produces justification in an individual, does not invariably of its nature produce conversion from all serious sin, or is not sufficient for the conversion from all serious sin. And then have here missing the actual quote, and then it says, this is a heretical statement. No Catholic can believe it. Council of Trent says it's heresy. And then John Paul II, Veritatis Splendor, is against it. And then the same for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th statement. And at the end of the 7 statements, for instance, the 4th one, or number 6, moral principles and moral truths contained in the divine revelation and in the natural law do not include negative prohibitions that absolutely forbid particular kinds of action, inasmuch as they are always gravely unlawful on account of their object. So you can sometimes do immoral things. These statements, clearly erroneous, clearly heretical, and then the quotes, which are missing from this little copy I have here. The quotes aren't there. The quote of Council of Trent, and so on, dictating clearly how this is heresy. And then after the 7 propositions, these propositions all contradict truths that are divinely revealed and that Catholics must believe with the assent of divine faith. It is necessary for the good of souls that they be once more condemned by the authority of the Church. In listing these 7 propositions, we do not intend to give an exhaustive list of all the heresies and the errors which an unbiased reader attempting to read Amoris Laetitia in its natural and obvious sense would plausibly take to be affirmed, suggested, or favored by this document. Rather, we seek to list the propositions which Your Holiness's words, deeds, and omissions have in effect upheld and propagated to the great and imminent danger of souls. This is a document written by Novus Ordo priests, written by members of the Novus Ordo dioceses and religious orders, and lay theologians who have their doctorate from the church. This is not a document of the Society of St. Pius X. Concerning the Amoris Laetitia. So we'll read this sentence again, and then we're going to read Father Glaise. Father Glaise, Bishop Fillet told us, he said officially, it's in dici.org, Father Glaise wrote a very thorough and proper explanation of Amoris Laetitia, which is correct and which is the official position of the SSPX on Amoris Laetitia. And it is a very, very well thought out, very, very proper, and a very good analysis. That's the analysis. We have an analysis of the SSPX, the official SSPX analysis. We're going to read from it in just a moment. Here we read the analysis of priests who are not of the SSPX. Many of them probably do not celebrate the Latin Mass at all. Some of them might celebrate the Latin Mass. Some of them maybe even exclusively celebrate the Latin Mass. But they are all part of the structure of the modernist church. They all belong to the Vatican II Church. They all teach in dioceses or in religious orders, are members of the modern church. And they put together this document without the assistance of any priests in the Society of St. Pius X. Now let's go to the... And so that these propositions all contradict truths that are divinely revealed and that Catholics must believe with the assent of divine faith. Statement of conservative and apostolic priests. Now, let's go to the statement of the SSPX on the exact same document. We can't read all of it because we only have about 12 hours. But nonetheless, it's gobbledygook for a long way to come, the beginning. Now there are many, the historical context of Amoris Laetitia, the Synod did this, and the Synod did that, and blah, blah, blah. After much blah, 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 we're going to come to a conclusion. Here is Father Glez. In order to establish this conclusion, one would have to be able, let's go back for a second here. Is subjectivism negation of revealed truth? The heading. Does such subjectivism, which we find in Amoris Laetitia, as understood in its principle as well as in its 5 conclusions, he goes through the 5 dubia of Cardinal Burke, that follow from it here, represent the negation of a divinely revealed truth that is proposed as such by an infallible act of the ecclesiastical magisterium? One would have to be able to answer yes in order to conclude that Amoris Laetitia presents a heresy in each of the points just singled out, and that Francis deserves the equivalent theological designation of heretic. In order to establish this conclusion, it would be necessary to verify 2 things. First, are the 5 truths demolished by these 5 doubts, so many dogmas? Secondly, does Amoris Laetitia negate these dogmas, or at least call them into question formally and explicitly enough? The answer to these 2 questions is far from obvious and certain. For this new theology of Francis, which extends from that of Vatican II, avoids this sort of formal opposition with regard to the truths already proposed infallibly by the magisterium before Vatican II. It sins most often by omission or by ambivalence. It is therefore dubious in its very substance, and it is dubious exactly insofar as it is modernist, or more precisely, neo-modernist. So, can you understand that? It's like the, can you read this word before he does in Sesame Street? So what does he say here? This is Father Glez speaking, as a representative of the SSPX, in the official organ of the SSPX, and explicitly confirmed by Bishop Foulet as the position of the Society of St. Pius X. The position of the Society of St. Pius X is that Amoris Laetitia is not heretical, but it rather promotes heresy. Does the Pope intend or to affirm or deny? We don't know. The practical subversion of doctrine, another heading. And that this is finding an appropriate expression. How bad is Amoris Laetitia? It's not heretical, but it favors the heretical. It's not directly against the faith, but it leads in that kind of a direction and can be understood in that way. This is the SSPX speaking. So we'll just read one sentence again. Move back to it here. Does Amoris Laetitia negate these dogmas, or at least call them into question formally and explicitly enough? The answer to these questions is far from obvious and certain. So, it's not certain. It is therefore dubious, far from obvious and certain. Now we go back to what is written by the Navasota priests who are in the mainstream church. And they are writing, these propositions all contradict truths that are divinely revealed and that Catholics must believe with the assent of divine faith. It is necessary for the good of souls that they be once more condemned by the authority of the Church. In listing these 7 propositions, we do not intend to give an exhaustive list of all the heresies and errors which an unbiased reader attempting to read Amoris Laetitia in its natural and obvious sense would plausibly take to be affirmed or suggested or favored by this document. Who writes clearly? Which one can you understand? What is the position of the 40 deep theologians? Here are 7 statements, each clearly enunciated. Each of them is what Pope Francis says. Each is backed up by a 25-page document quoting the correct passages of Amoris Laetitia. Each one is shown to be truly heretical, backed up by the teaching of the Council of Trent, and by the teaching of John Paul II, and by the teaching of Vatican II. Now we come to Bishop Follet's documents, and Bishop Follet's communication, and the SSPX communication. Amoris Laetitia is a matter for concern. Amoris Laetitia could be misunderstood. We accept Amoris Laetitia insofar as it is true, and we reject it insofar as, never say the word reject, but we reject any of those things which might be in there which are contrary to the Holy Roman Catholic faith. That's what Bishop Follet says. We, like Vatican II, we accept the things that are in conformity with tradition. We're especially worried about chapter 8. And we reject those things that are against tradition, and we accept those things that can be interpreted in the light of tradition, Does he mention one of the heresies? No. Does he tell you what the problem is? No. Whereas these 40 laymen and priests, they point out what the problem is. Now what happens after they write the document? Bishop Follet puts his name to the signature as a signature of the document. What does this mean? What does it mean? What do we have here? Well, what we have is that Bishop Follet approves of the document of these good priests. They're good men. But notice something that might be, if you listen to what we said earlier, this document shows that Amoris Laetitia is contrary to the former teaching of the Church and the teaching of John Paul II in Veritatis Splendor and the teaching of Vatican II. What's the problem with that statement? It's false. It is a false statement. Why is it a false statement? We have a Latin axiom, a Latin principle, that bonum ex integra causa, malum ex quamque defectu. Good is of the whole cause, evil is of one defect. What's a lie? What's an error? An error is a statement that has many truths in it, but there's a hole. There's a missing part. There's an error. There's a false part. What do we have in this document of these good priests and these laymen who are doctors of theology, who signed their names, who wrote a clear document? They are to be commended for doing this. But what's the problem? They claim, as did Cardinal Burke, and the 4 cardinals, 2 of which are already dead, they claim, as did Cardinal Burke, whose signature is not on this document. Cardinal Burke is nowhere to be found. No cardinal, no bishop has their name on the document. They've run away. And what do we have here? Priests, Navasota priests who celebrate the new Mass. Navasota priests who follow Vatican II, but conservatively. These priests are standing up and saying, we don't accept Amoris Laetitia. It is against the moral teaching of the Church. What's the problem with that? They claim Amoris Laetitia is against Trent. Correct, it is. It is against Vatican II? No, it is not. It is against John Paul II? No, it is not. It's like a husband saying, I have never been unfaithful to my wife and my 2 girlfriends. Now, if you have never been unfaithful to your wife and your 2 girlfriends, guess what? You're unfaithful. Because you only have 1 wife. And if you've been with your 2 girlfriends, you are an adulterer. And so to say, I have never been unfaithful to my wife and my 2 girlfriends, that equals a lying statement, because the very fact that you admit that you've been with your two girlfriends means you are unfaithful. So likewise, a statement that says Amoris Laetitia is against Vatican II, John Paul II, and the previous teaching of the church is the same thing as saying my wife and my two girlfriends. The two girlfriends are Vatican II and John Paul II, and the wife is the teaching of the church of 2,000 years. So now we have a new, what's happening here? There is a new conservative, new quote-unquote traditional movement within the church. I just learned today, for instance, and I guess this is happening in other places as well. One of our faithful was recently at a wedding, and there's a priest, an apostolic priest, who says the new Mass, and in the Mass, he does not mention the name of John Paul, of Francis in the canon. So we have a Novus Ordo priest now celebrating the new Mass, that are Sedevacantist. So now you've got Sedevacantists celebrating the new Mass, Sedevacantists who believe there's no Pope celebrating the Latin Mass, celebrating the new Mass. And you have all kinds of variety. Now we have a new variety. These are going to be the new traditional souls, the followers of Cardinal Burke, who are going to stand firm for what Vatican II truly teaches. Because if Vatican II is properly implemented, then we will never have Amoris Laetitia. What is the duty of the SSPX? We are supposed to be the commandos of the special forces and the Navy SEALs that know all about modernism. We know how to spot modernism and how to condemn it. That's what we've been doing for the last 40 years. Let's look at Amoris Laetitia. What is the problem of the heresies contained in Amoris Laetitia? What is the problem about saying we're going to give Holy Communion to those people that live in the state of sin, and they can stay in the state of sin, and they don't need to get out of the state of sin? Is that a new teaching? What is the problem with the statement of Pope Francis that those people that live in a good marriage, a true marriage, but feel guilty because they don't get along with their wife and don't get along with their husband, that they feel the need to leave their true marriage in order to find a new girl and a new guy? They are compelled by morality to leave their true wife, then they have to do it. And if they're living in sin and they're compelled by morality to stay with their non-wife, well, then they have to do it. And the priest must give them confession, absolution. He must give them Holy Communion. He must bless them. Is this a new heresy? No. All that it is the application of modernism, which is found in Vatican II. The specific case here is the Dignitatis Humanae, or the Declaration on Religious Liberty. In the Declaration on Religious Liberty, the Vatican II says, a man has an inalienable right to choose his own religion given to him by God. You have the right to choose a false religion. You have the right to choose Hinduism. You have the right to choose Protestantism. You have the right to choose Satanism. You have the right to choose the Catholic religion. You have the right to choose any religion you want, including the true one. And not only do you have that right given to you by God, that is the right to choose sin, but you cannot be prevented from practicing that right by the government and by the laws. The laws cannot stop you from building a Satanist church. The laws cannot stop you from building a Protestant church, a Hindu church, and so on. Therefore, in a Catholic state, and there were many Catholic states in 1965, they must remove from their books any laws against the building and the promulgation of false religions. That's the teaching of Vatican II. All we're doing is taking that teaching and applying it to Catholic moral theology on marriage. You have the right to choose a woman that's not your wife. Now, it's better for you to choose a woman that is your wife, of course, and you can choose that if you want. But you have the right to choose a woman that's not your wife. If you choose a woman that's not your wife, the priest has no right to stop you from going to communion just because you made that choice. See how that's the same error? All we're doing is taking the error of ecumenism applied to religion as a whole and now applying it to marriage. What's the problem of the heresy of Amoris Laetitia? It is the problem of the application of Vatican II. What is the cause of the error? Vatican II. The new Mass, which is the expression of that heresy, it is teaching the same thing. The worship of man. That's why the priest turns and faces the people in the Mass, because he worships man. And the priest, the people that in turn worship the priest, they give prayers to the priest, he gives the prayers to the people. It's just an assemblage of people in some kind of a democratic union, and Jesus Christ is unimportant. And therefore, if there's no fable at Mass, then the priest needs not say the Mass. Hence, they have stopped saying private Masses. And they stopped saying their prayers and breviary and so on, the majority of priests. What's the problem? Vatican II. Now what happens when we condemn Amoris Laetitia, which needs to be condemned? It's bad. It's bad document number 4783, problem number 6,463.9. But what's the problem? The problem is the cause. If you have a cancer that causes a little brown dot to appear on your face that doesn't look good, and so you go to the doctor and the doctor says, you know what, we need to put some skin color mascara over that, and it gets soft, so we need to put something to harden your skin and to remove that problem. You still die. Because what causes it? Cancer. Take away the cancer and the spot will go away. We go to the root of the cause and not to the effect. Amoris Laetitia is not a new thing. Amoris Laetitia is not a new doctrine. It's not a new morals. It's not a new scandal. All that it is the application in the moral world of the heresies of Vatican II. That's all it is. And hence, if we want to fight Amoris Laetitia, don't shoot at the balloon, but shoot at the cause. The cause is Vatican II, the cause of the new Mass. Now, what do we find here? The Society of St. Pius X is supposed to know that. We have our priests communicating gobbledygook confusion, telling our people Francis is not teaching heresy. We have a Novus Ordo priest saying he is teaching heresy. We have the society priest giving excuses for Pope Francis. Why? Because he's being nice to me. See, I hate the mafia. It's a terrible thing. But my cousin happens to be the godfather. They're not that bad. And as long as my cousin takes care of me, the godfather and the cousin, he's not that bad. But then my cousin got mad at me, and now my cousin's got a death warrant out on me. You know, the mafia is really bad. We've got to do something about the mafia. Why do we do something about the mafia? Because there's a death warrant on me. Why is the mafia not that bad? Or because he's my cousin and he's giving me a couple of kickbacks. What's the rule? Me. God, worshipping of self. Worshipping of man, that's the rule. Why is it that the SSPX makes excuses for Pope Francis? Why is it they made excuses for Pope Benedict? Why is it that they take a clearly heretical document that a 7-year-old can look at and see, bad, wrong, and they use their high theological terminology and their confused language to mitigate the evil, mitigate the harm? They made excuses for Pope Benedict when he talked about homosexuality, homosexual prostitute being moral, and the society excused it. Here we find now we're talking about the marriage, giving Holy Communion to those living in sin, and promoting sin directly in our parishes by the Pope. They excuse it. Why? Because he's being nice to us. Pope Francis is being nice to us. He said our confessions are okay. He said we can ordain priests. Never mind what he does to the Princesses of the Immaculate. Never mind the lies that he teaches. Never mind his wickedness of doctrine. Never mind his leading souls to hell. So we use very intelligent words. Did Father Glez say Pope Francis is a wonderful man? No, he did not. Did Father Glez say that he is teaching holy doctrine? No, he did not. Did he say he's teaching heresy? No, he did not. He said, be concerned. You ought to be concerned. This is not something to be concerned about. It's heresy. And what about this new movement? He signs his name along with these good priests. These good priests are in the Novus Ordo. These good priests are trying to attack Pope Francis standing on sand. But you could say they're standing on a rock as well, because they're talking on the rock of Trent. But what is it? They took the rock and they put it in the pit of sand. And now they're standing on the rock, which is in the pit of sand. What happens? The rock and them go down quicker. They go down more quickly into the quicksand, and they will be buried more quickly. We cannot give half answers. We cannot give false answers to these serious problems. We must give the complete answer. Amoris Laetitia is simply the moral application of the dogmas contained in Vatican Council II. Vatican Council II is heretical. Vatican Council II has caused 1 billion Catholics to lose their faith. Throughout the entire world, every single Catholic family has somebody who's not practicing the faith. Catholics used to have children, children, children. Now they have 1, 2, or 0. That's what has happened. We've already lost our teaching of faith on the family. We've already handed out annulments like they're candy. We've already broken up marriages and family. We've already stopped the teaching of the faith. We've already made it easy for abortion and contraception and all manner of evil to be spread in our church. We already have priests and bishops who are promoting this wickedness. And now the Pope simply says, I promote it too. What's the shock? And when the Pope says it, what's he doing? He's fitting perfectly in harmony with Vatican II. What does this mean? Many souls now will look at this document. And you see, Rome's getting better. Look at these good priests. They're standing up against Amoris Laetitia, and God bless them for doing so. They're standing up against Amoris Laetitia, but what are they doing? They're standing on John Paul II, which is standing on quicksand. They're standing on Vatican II, which is standing on quicksand. It's just like the Americans saying, we must stop abortion. Abortion is evil. Why is abortion evil? Because the majority of Americans are against it. This is dead. Abortion is not evil because the majority of Americans are against it. If that was the case, McDonald's would be the most healthy and wonderful food on the planet. Because the majority of Americans eat McDonald's hamburgers. That's not the way it is. This is wickedness. So in any case, we cannot follow this error. There is a new movement being established in the church, and it used to be called the neocons. What's happening now, the Fraternity of St. Peter, the Institute of Christ the King, the Society of St. Pius X, the conservative Novus priests who say the new Mass, are all gathering together in one. And they're gathering together to do what? They're gathering together in order to say that, well, we're united against the bad morals of the Pope. We're united against that. And what we believe and how we think about it, well, we need not worry about that. We're going to have a new union. And we're concerned about Vatican II. And everybody forgot about Vatican II. Let's move on. Let's move on. Don't they realize that this is how revolution works? It is the case in the church that after Vatican II, there must be a new council. There's got to be Vatican III. And Vatican III is going to be worse than Vatican II. Vatican III is going to overturn things of Vatican II because that's how revolution works. And now we're saying, well, they're not talking about the council anymore. Well, the same principles of the council are here. The same principles of the council are what's in this document of Amoris Laetitia. Has it changed? No, it is not. It is the same heresy of modernism condemned by St. Pius X in 1907. The same heresy of modernism which is all over Vatican II. And that heresy which is being implemented in a moral, practical way by Pope Francis. That's what we have. These heresies are the same heresies. They're not different heresies. And the answer is the same. Throw out the council. The answer is the same. Throw out the new Mass. The answer is the same. Turn back to Catholic tradition. The answer is the same. Go back to Jesus Christ being the King of every family, of every city, of every nation, of every atom and molecule in the universe. The answer is the same faith handed down to us by our ancestors. Christ must rule in every aspect of society. Money is not the answer. Conservatism is not the answer. Being anti-immoral is not the answer. It's Christ and his whole doctrine that is the answer. And partial answers are not answers. They are not. Cannot be accepted. So in any case, let's not fall into this trap of this new conservatism. And the SSPX has jumped in the pit. Now look at this document, this document which says clearly Amoris Laetitia is heretical. Very good. He even points out correctly 7 heresies. Very good. It quotes the Council of Trent. Very good. John Paul II, bad. Vatican II, bad. There's the inconsistency. The rest is good. Who wrote it? Did Bishop Fillet write it and hand it to them? No. Did the SSPX write it and hand it to them? Did we advise them? No. We're writing modernist communications of garbage that are as gobbledygook and mush, designed to destroy the minds of the souls entrusted to our care. That's what we're writing. And they're writing better stuff. Already in the last 5 years, I've run into many cases of Catholics of the SSPX that stopped going to SSPX masses because the SSPX priest is too soft, and they went to the Fraternity of St. Peter masses because those priests are actually condemning Vatican II in the new mass. Not essentially, but secondarily. They're condemning some of the errors of the modern day. They're talking clearly about the faith, more clearly than the SSPX. The SSPX, corruptio optimi pessimi is the Latin expression. The corruption of the best is the worst. We were the leaders of Catholic tradition. Now, its assault has lost its savor, and wherewith shall it be salted? It's useless. It's useless. Fraternity of St. Peter priest, Institute of Christ the King priest, SSPX priest are going to give a talk in the Fatima conference in the next few days. Guaranteed, the least Catholic of the 3 talks is going to be the one given by the SSPX priest. The softest of the 3 talks is going to be the one given by the SSPX priests. They're all 3 going to be missing the essential truth. But which one's going to be the softest? It's going to be the SSPX priest. This is the new society. And what does it do? It causes a loss of faith amongst our people. And then you have, well, you see, Amoris Laetitia. They're saying it's bad. What dubia of Cardinal Burke? Cardinal Burke said to the Pope, you're going against John Paul the Great. He's standing on mush. He's not standing on solid doctrine. Therefore, though it's a good thing he's fighting against the Pope, it's a bad thing that he's fighting on false ground. How do we help Cardinal Burke? How do we help these good priests, these 40 good priests and these good theologians? How do we help them? We tell them, it is good that you are condemning Amoris Laetitia. It is good that you're writing clear sentences that someone who knows how to read can understand. It's good that you're doing this, but you are leaving out the essential problem, which is Vatican Councils II modernism. Vatican Councils II heresies, which is the cause of the problems of our church today. That council and its ideology must be thrown out and condemned. We must stand for what the church has taught for 2,000 years, and it's not what it's taught for the last 50 years. The new church and the true church are not the same church. So they are getting the grace to see some of the truth. But if they stand not on the whole truth, it's like a boat that goes out with a really solid hull on one side and nothing on the other. It sinks. We must have a complete hull all the way around in the whole faith. Let's pray for that to happen. These good priests that wrote this document, actually something clear, something correct. They backed it up. But what do? They made a grave mistake. And they tried to say, we want to get back to the good old days of Benedict XVI. We want to get to the good old days of the conservative John Paul II, the Saint John Paul II. We want to get to the good old days of John the 23rd. We want to go back to those days. It's like the husband that wants to go back to his second wife. You can go to hell with your 4th wife, you can go to hell with your 2nd wife. Why bother? You got to go back to your 1st wife, not to the 2nd, not to the 3rd, not to the 5th, to the 1st wife, the only one that is the wife. The others are all whores. The others are all worthless. The others are all leading souls to hell. The others are all enemies of God. Only one wife. And that's our holy church and our holy faith, our holy doctrine. Let's go back to that wife and nothing else in between. And so, we don't want to hear more like we hear nowadays. I cheated on my girlfriend. You can't cheat on your girlfriend. You can cheat on your wife. Can't cheat on your girlfriend. Go back and be faithful to your girlfriend. You can't be faithful to your girlfriend. Every time you're with her, it's a sin. And you can't be faithful to Vatican II. It's a sin. You can't be faithful to the teachings of these modernist popes. It's a sin. We can only be faithful to the teaching of Jesus Christ, immutable, handed down for 2,000 years. That's what we must be faithful to. And let's pray that these good priests and these theologians who did a good thing on the path towards the truth, let them get the grace to stand firmly for it. And if they don't, it's like tying your feet to a rock and then putting the rock on top of the quicksand. they will sink more quickly than anyone else. Let them stand upon the rock of the faith without any quicksand underneath, and then God will bless them, and the devil shall be conquered. So God bless you all, in the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.